on fire. I'm not a victim. A girl on fire. I'll stand my ground. Girl on fire. I've made a choice. I stand proud. I'm a girl on fire. I'm a mother, a daughter, a sister, a friend. I'm every woman. I have taken up arms and I choose to defend all that I hold dear. Independent and strong, you will not keep me down. You can't break me.
Annette Oxley here for Tac Shack Tactical TV and for our GOSA Girls on Fire 16 Days of Action for No Violence Against Women and Children. I'm here with a very interesting lady. I call her the case Capetta of South Africa. Hestelle, welcome and thanks for speaking to us.
Thank you very much for having me, Lynette.
You talk in your book and you're also about lifting the curtain on something that few people see beyond. Do you want to expand on that?
Yeah, I think what we do is actually, I always say, it's either showstopper or show starter or conversation stopper, conversation starter. Whenever somebody asks me, I try to rather not tell them what I do. And if I have to, I'll tell them I'm a doctor. I don't tell them I'm a forensic pathologist. But when you do eventually get there, there's this hushed silence that usually falls over the conversation. And it's something that people don't know anything about, actually. And I think people also don't know the processes regarding unnatural death. And it makes it seem to be steeped in mystery. And I thought, I actually need to convey a bit of what I do and how things work.
You've done over 7,000 autopsies and you've done Blood as a Voice. I've read it, so if anybody else hasn't read it. Can you tell us firstly, who is Hestelle van Staden before we go into any other details?
I'm actually just another girl next door, to be quite honest with you. I think I'm incredibly privileged to do what I do, because I've been one of those people that's able to follow my dream. This is what I've really wanted to become since I was a little girl. But you know what? I always think that doctors aren't more special than anybody else, although it appears that some doctors do think that. But, at the end of the day, we all just need to do what our thing is, what you were put on earth for. And that's my approach to life. So I'm really just the girl next door. I have 2 children, which I have to run to school to and back with. At home I cook and I do other things, and I just have an interesting job. That's the only difference.
If you had to define what a forensic pathologist do?
So what we do is autopsies for most of the time we are there at work. So we do medico-legal autopsies. So those are on people that has died of an unnatural cause. But apart from that, there's a lot of administration involved with what we do. A lot of report writing. We testify in court, often writing medico-legal reports. We do histology, which is where we look at tissue under the microscope. I'm also involved in teaching under and postgraduate students at WITS and at the mortuary itself, where we train specialists. And then I also do private work, so I do medico-legal opinions for private individuals or private postmortems.
So we did touch on it. You say that you do not feel like you do God's gift. You're not a God's gift to the world, because I think a lot of doctors do think that they are. And this was a calling. When did you know for the first time that you wanted to become a forensic pathologist?
I was 5 years old. My mother tells me, when I decided I wanted to be a doctor and write a book, and I just never thought the two would coincide. But I was 14 years, you're talking about Gay Scarpetta, and I actually read one of Patricia Cornwell's book, and I met Gay Scarpetta. And as I read that, I just knew this is what I wanted to do. It's just like that penny just dropped in that moment. And I was looking at everything she was explaining and the process, and I just knew this is my thing. I mean, we did watch things like, programs like Quincy M.E.
I love Quincy as well.
I actually have the box set at home.
I hadn't thought about that for a very long time.
Yeah, isn't it amazing?
Quincy was absolutely amazing. It was way before Gay Scarpetta.
Yeah, and it really opened my eyes to that. Murder, She Wrote was the other thing I watched. So I think there's that inquisitiveness and that feeling that you want to know. So when I read the book, it was the first time that I actually thought about it in a practical sense. I suppose it's also because I was a bit older and I'm getting to the age where I knew now how to start applying or think about applying and what subjects I want to take. But yeah, it was 14 years old.
It's a slightly different when I read your book about, you don't do the whole thing. Mostly they show one person actually cutting open the person and doing the whole thing. You basically have people to do that. Am I correct?
Yes, we work as a team. We are able to, and we should be able to, and that's what we are examined on as well, do the entire process all by ourselves. But you can imagine, especially with the caseload that we have in Johannesburg, at any given time we do 4 autopsies at one stage. So if you had to do 4 all by yourself, it would probably take an incredibly long period, because you obviously also need to document everything you see and say. So we do have assistants. We have dry assistants, which is basically what we call a scribe. So that's the person that writes down everything as you dictate, and they also accept the samples so that they can immediately be sealed and retained as evidence. But then we also have 2, for the 4 bodies, we have 2 dissectors. So how that works is I would do the external examination and describe all the wounds, all the external appearances. Okay, well, I tend to do that myself because it gives the scribe a chance to finish with whatever they're busy with, and I don't like standing idle. So I'll quickly write that down, and as soon as she's able to join me, she'll take over and write down whatever I'm saying. But then the 2 dissectors will, once I give them permission, they can continue, and they will eviscerate, so basically take out all the organs from the body, unless there is specific exams that I want to do myself. In the meantime, I'm going on to the next body and keeping an eye on the guys and whatever they are doing.
What are their qualifications?
They are actually not qualified. They are simply trained at the mortuary.
That is quite interesting. Do you think sort of forensic pathology is a quest for answers?
Yes, it definitely is. Lynette, I just want to finish my previous answer. I forgot to say something.
Sorry.
No, it was me. What we do, though, is the organs itself, those are cut up and examined by the forensic pathologist. So those are not, so as much as the dissectors remove the organs, from there on the process is ours. And yeah, it definitely is a search for answers. I think in order to do what we do, you need to have an inquisitive mind, and you need to look for whatever you can find. And I often say to my students and to other people, the more you look for, the more you find. If you're just going to look at what, kind of like one of those racehorses, look at whatever is in front of you, you're going to miss a lot of things. And in fact, although we do forensic pathology, which is unnatural, there's a lot of incidental findings that we also, that, like the tumor that the person might not even have known they had, or the underlying medical condition which they might not have known they had, and which sometimes do contribute to the death. But it's definitely a search for answers, and I think it really is to be able to give answers in terms of the legal process as to what led to this person's death, but not only that, the circumstances. Was there a fight back? Was there, what sequence did things happen in, those kind of answers? And then also to be able to answer the families, although we don't really get to deal with families, but sometimes they only get those answers in court. But at the end of the day, they also need closure, and they also need to understand what has happened to their loved one.
But you do mention that you don't really deal with the families up front, except if it's in court.
Yes. So in terms of the process, remember, everything we do is in terms of legal processes. So in terms of the Inquest Act, we cannot anticipate prejudice or influence the outcome of an inquest. So that means that we only issue the report to the investigating officer, even in cases where the death occurred in hospital where there was a doctor involved, that was just the treating doctor. That doctor doesn't get a report even. So we don't deal with families directly. Everything goes via the investigating officer, because at the end of the day, you must also remember that we don't get all the information. The family might actually be the perpetrator or the perpetrators. And in terms of that, the law is structured in such a way that everybody is treated in the same manner. Now, for me, that does quite a bit of private work. I have been exposed to families more often, and because I've been doing this for so long, my phone number seems to be doing the rounds. So at times I just get phoned by families, and in cases where it's, for example, a motor vehicle accident that somebody has died in, I don't see the problem in terms of discussing or saying to the family, you know what, this is basically what it means, or the injuries, what they were. Because in those cases, there's nothing that can influence the outcome of the inquest, but the families do also need to have a certain extent of closure just by knowing what has happened to their loved one.
So you mentioned working with the investigating officer. They should be if it's a major crime, they should be at the autopsy, but they mostly not.
Correct.
In South Africa. Why is this happening, and how does it influence your work?
They are not even major crimes only. They are supposed to be there at all the autopsies. I understand if they're not there with hospital-related deaths, that's a different story. But it's very rare that we see an investigating officer there, and it's often the same guys that tend to attend. You can see it's part of their work ethic. It goes both ways. We are also supposed to be at the scenes of crime or scenes of death, or whatever it may be, and we are often not called out to those. And on the other hand, the investigating officers are simply not present at the autopsies either. It's a huge problem because there's an immediate loss of information between the two sides. We could have helped them right from the start at the scene, assisting them with information that might help them find out, is this the primary scene of death, whatever the case may be, what weapons to look for. And we need them there to give us the background information, because we often only get information such as the deceased was found dead in the veld. I mean, I had an SAP 180 form, which is the form that accompanies the body to the mortuary, that had not applicable ticked in terms of the gender, the race, and the age of the deceased. I mean, how is that not applicable? It's particularly applicable. So unfortunately, that is a problem. I don't know whether it's an issue in terms of training, but it's definitely a problem with the system as well. From what I understand, the investigating officer is sometimes only allocated that case, that murder case, for example, the following day. So they were never called out to the scene themselves. It was the guys on call that were called to the scene, and the investigating officer gets that docket the following day. So by the time that we do the post-mortem, they might not even know that it has been done. But it's definitely a problem with personalities, or personal investment as well from their side. But I think the larger problem is the fact that the system doesn't help them. To be quite honest with you, from what I understand, there is an issue with resources as well. And I know that from the media, not from reports specifically made to me, where they say they don't have resources, for example, to drive to the mortuary. So I think it's a bigger problem than just, not them wanting not to attend.
I do know that there's a problem with resources. We find it quite often. There's no vehicles around when we work with the Central Firearm Registry to get some of the documents over to the CFR from the local police stations. I do training in the firearm industry, and they get such a little amount of rounds per year or per 2 years. You cannot expect a person to be proficient in that thing because there's a lack of resources.
Absolutely. And I'm sorry for them for that. It's definitely, I think they get a lot of slack from the public and people don't always understand that there's a lot of, and I think that's one of the reasons why I did the book. It's one of the reasons why we do the TV show as well.
Maybe just mention the TV show after that, yeah.
Okay, yeah, so we do a series called Autopsy, which looks at unnatural deaths, sometimes so they turn out to be natural, where we discuss different cases, a case per episode. And what we try to show in there is that there's people invested in this process, and there are people that's trying to assist and to further the process, and that really cares, that really want to make a difference.
There's still some good people that want justice for the victims, am I correct?
Absolutely, and a lot of police officers go above and beyond, and that I can really testify to. They do more than what would be expected of them, and they do it with such passion, and they do it for the love of the story, not because they're getting huge salaries.
No. When you see, what do you mean by the words, I see the video?
You know what, it was I think it's a phrase that was coined by my first professor, Hendrik Scholes. And when I just started at forensics, he said to me, Hestelle, seen the video. I remember him, I can actually hear his voice saying that. And what he actually meant to say was, when you look at the body on the table, you need to see what has happened to this person that brought them there. You need to see the shooting in your head or the motor vehicle accident, and you need to see where this person was in relation to the shooter. You need to see how they fell, because that will explain to you all the injuries that you're seeing. It will explain to you why there's, for example, abrasions over the face of a person that died a natural death because they had a stroke and they couldn't, they were busy dying, they couldn't cover their face, for example. And once you do that, it makes it much easier to go to court, because in your mind's eye, you've already seen the possibilities. I think one should never be focused on only the one possibility that might or might not be presented to you by the police, but you would have to see all the possibilities, what could have happened to bring this person here, because when you are then presented with a different version in court, you can say, yes, it fits, or no, it doesn't fit, and this is the reason why I'm saying that. I also think that it makes it more difficult maybe sometimes, because suddenly you're seeing the trauma that has happened to this person. You are experiencing that with them, and I don't want to make it airy-fairy, it's definitely not that. But you need to be able to see what has happened to that body, and that makes it definitely more emotional, I would say.
So it was very interesting for me to read about Evander. That's one of the hospitals that you were trained in, am I correct?
That's right, yeah, I did my comsiv there.
And very interesting, the Cuban side. It was very interesting to me to read the whole story. But I think you mentioned specifically the first time how horrific rapes are. And that's something that I would like to touch on. South Africa is the rape capital of the world. I said, we've discussed it just before this interview about some people just see it as a fait accompli that they actually get raped and they just get on with life, and it's not the right thing. It's
absolutely not.
It's just not. How do you see from that side how brutal, from your side, how brutal rape against women in South Africa are?
The problem is that we're seeing quite a lot of these. Obviously, we are only seeing the tip of the iceberg, because the ladies that arrive in the mortuary have died in the process. So these are not ladies that were only raped. They were raped and murdered. And, often it goes hand in hand with a huge amount of trauma. We know that there's certain crimes that's very specifically kind of aligned with rape. We know that when there's a strangulation of a female, often specifically, but often of males as well, that comes in, you need to make sure that there's no sexual element to it, because those are often strongly aligned. And I think the fact that I started in Evander when I was doing my community service, and I saw a lot of rapes, and I don't know whether it was because, look, we were very severely understaffed, and I was obviously one of the female doctors, and at that stage the definition of rape was different in South Africa. Yeah. So I think the issue was that they preferred bringing these women in to see a female doctor, which one can obviously understand, and which is actually preferable, because it immediately, you're not confronted necessarily with somebody that you might perceive as being, part of the problem, which is really unfair, but unfortunately it is what it is. So I think they often brought in these youngsters specifically, and I saw people across all ages come in, little girls. I remember I saw a granny once that was brought in, and I think it opened my eyes to the horrendous effect that rape has, not only in terms of the medical, the injuries, because a lot of what we saw at that stage, these patients were usually not severely injured in terms of the genital injuries, or even the assault that sometimes go along with that. It's often the little girls that are severely injured. Even that's what we also see when we do post-mortems. But it's more the psychological effect of it, the absolute trauma that these women go through, the anxiety that they experience, and now you've got to do this examination on them, where you're basically re-traumatizing them. And for me, right at the start, I decided I need to make them as, I don't want to say comfortable, because I don't think you can ever be comfortable, but to make it as easy on them as I possibly could. And I think it's been something that's been really a passion of mine, to make sure that I do my best, whether it is to ensure that they are not unnecessarily traumatized, or whether it is to collect all the evidence, or whether it is to testify. I think it's something that's really driven me.
I've had a couple of discussions with Gerard Labuskachny, and if we look at gender-based violence, your chances of actually ending up dead in the end, if you stay in a relationship, is pretty good. And I'm sure you see a lot of those cases as well.
We do see gender-based violence. Funny enough, I don't even think funny is the right word, but we also see the reverse of that. We also see where it's actually women that has actually killed a husband, or
we actually were in the same one in autopsy recently.
Yes, that's right.
Where
the roles were reversed.
Absolutely, yes.
And that was very interesting for me, because that's not our perception of how things go. I suppose because females are I don't want to call it the weaker sex, definitely not, but we are more vulnerable. And unfortunately, we do see gender-based violence, and we do see the outcome of that. I did the post-mortem yesterday of a lady that was stabbed multiple times, allegedly by her boyfriend. And I mean, you could just see how abused she was in this. And unfortunately, she's not the only one. We do see that, and I think there's even more of them that end up in trauma units. And I think that is obviously the majority of what happens, but those women carry the scars with them forever, if they ever leave that relationship, and if they are not killed.
Getting back to rape, last year we interviewed a lady, and it's one of the worst things that I've ever done, because it was quite a well-known case, and she was raped by 8 young guys and brutalized, can't have children, and not very well educated. But she doesn't understand the justice system didn't work for her, and she doesn't understand, and she's never going to get over it. There's nothing positive. She's not one of those people that's trying to make a difference. She's always going to be that victim, and she's never going to get out of that darkness. And I think that's one of the things that really got me badly.
Yeah.
It's not somebody that said, I'm going to do something, I'm going to change my life, I'm going to dust myself off, and I'm going to get on with it. She's just bitter, and that's all that's left. And that was for me absolutely horrific.
Oh, if you look at Alison Botha's story, and I say story, I always feel bad saying story, because it's more than just a story, it's her life. And if I remember reading her book many years ago, and I thought, this woman is just amazing. She's a survivor, she's a real survivor, and the good she has done, and I mean, the path she walked is absolutely horrendous, but she lifted herself up.
And they all say to you, I still have my bad days.
Absolutely.
But I'm not going to let this define me. And that is positive, and that was what was so bad for me about this particular one, because this is totally broken, this lady. She's broken forever. And that was bad for me.
I often listen to Joyce Meyer, and she was saying something about, I think it was about grief, but also about, because her own story was very terrible. And she was saying, you need to grieve, but you're not supposed to pitch your tent there and live there. And I think that's the true thing. I do think we have to go through the process, and we've got to experience, because I think if you deny that, there's a different problem to that. One has to, I think, go and work through the trauma, and then sometimes with a counsellor, whatever you need, but then one needs to continue from there. But you know what, it's easy for me to say from the side. It's not something that I had to work through.
On a personal side, you were involved in 2 home invasions?
Yeah, I had 2 armed robberies.
But one of the things you said to yourself, I'm not going to be a victim. Can we talk a little bit about that?
I refuse to be the victim. I think it's a personality thing as well. And I remember I was incredibly traumatized whenever the gate, the front gate, because they came in twice through the front gate. Whenever I heard that sound of the gate opening, it is the most horrendous thing. I definitely had PTSD. I mean, my heart rate, and it's funny if you're a doctor, because you kind of recognize it, but you deny it. And I wouldn't at one stage admit that I was so traumatized. And then I realized, well, I've got to do something about this, and I refuse to live here. And what I do remember is, especially after the second time, it was men that came to help me from the SAPS, and they treated me in such a lovely manner. Look, they checked my story, make no mistake, because obviously there's people that would kind of, give you this story and make sure, for insurance claims, and they definitely checked my story. They weren't stupid, but they treated me with so much respect, and it was a comforting experience, and I think that also helped not to traumatize me any further. But at the end of the day, you can't go live there. I remember, and I do mention it in the book as well, I was off, I think, for the remainder of the week. It happened on the Monday, the second time, and I didn't go into forensics. I needed to get a new ID and driver's license, the whole story. And when I went back to work, the first person on my table was somebody that was involved in a robbery and was shot dead.
So you know what that bullet could have done to you and to your family.
Absolutely. And the first time, my children were with me in the car during the first robbery, and I remember thinking, and I remember seeing it in my mind's eye, what a gunshot wound to the chest looks like. And I thought to myself, just make sure he doesn't shoot. And I remember shifting myself. He didn't have a line on my one child, and I shifted myself so that he couldn't see my other child. And it's amazing how you go into survival mode and protect your children in such an instance. But I also remember, I can't live here. This can't be who I am. I need to get up from here, and I need to go on. You can't go stay there.
No, you can't. So one of the women that we interviewed yesterday actually said she had to move from the house that she was attacked in.
Yes.
So that was an interesting thing. We've had a home invasion a good couple of years, about 10, 15 years ago. And we fought back, and the guys left. And actually, the brigadier at our local police station said to us, do we want trauma counselling? And both my husband and myself said no, because we fought back, and we have a different view of the things. We know that we can get hurt, and you can die.
Yeah.
And we have made the decision beforehand, and I've personally made the decision that I'm going to fight back and not going to be a victim. So, but it is in the mind, and it's also just I know that I can defend myself, which makes a bit of a difference.
I think there's different ways of not being a victim.
Yeah.
It depends on the situation. I didn't have the option to fight back during the time. So not being a victim can be fighting back at the time, but it can also be how you manage it afterwards, or how you decide what do you do with it. And I think one needs to make people feel comfortable with what they had to do.
Absolutely. We're different people.
Absolutely.
We all react differently in a different situation, and it's a sum of how we grew up and a sum of what we experienced in our life.
And the situation which you are faced with.
And you have to analyse that situation quite
Absolutely.
quickly. So I always talk to people about situational awareness, that you make decisions about how you're going to act in a certain situation. When you get attacked, which we do often in South Africa, actually play that in your mind. Play that video in your mind and see what can happen and how you're going to act in a certain situation.
I think what was very difficult for me, now that you mentioned, I haven't thought about this for a long time, was I felt very guilty. Why did I not see this happen? Because of my job, I'm incredibly aware of where I am, where I park, where I walk, is there anybody. I mean, I've been followed in the past before, and I knew I was being followed, and I knew how to react to that. And in this case, it was done in such a shrewd manner that I didn't pick it up. And I felt incredibly guilty about it until I spoke to actually a police officer that put things into perspective for me. And I think that's something that we often feel, is that guilt. And I don't know whether it's an Afrikaans thing that we often feel guilty about things, but I felt guilty. Why didn't I prevent this? Why didn't I pick it up earlier? And I probably couldn't have.
their job, their only job is to
survey and
survey,
to
and that's their job. And they
Absolutely.
want to do their job. The perpetrators want to do their job as good as possible. So yes, if you listen to some of them, the planning is they're very clever. I've always
Absolutely.
said personally, if they use their
the skill.
skill for something good, it would be fantastic because
Absolutely.
they're actually quite skilled in what they do.
Absolutely.
That you're the privilege to be the last voice of the victims. It's quite a deep statement.
You know, Lynette, I feel very privileged to do what I do, not only because it has been my calling, I believe, and because that has been my wish, and you know, now you've been granted your wish, but because I feel like for the last time somebody can look at somebody's loved one and care for them, treat them with dignity, and make sure that we try and get as best all the information, everything that needs to be gathered from that body, because for the last time they are speaking, even though they're not speaking like me and you are, but there's evidence on the body. We often talk about Locard's principle, which is basically, and I do describe it in the book as well, like a forensic triangle. So in a victim, it's actually on anything in life, but in the case of crimes where there's the surroundings and then there's a victim and a perpetrator, the perpetrator leaves evidence on the victim as much as the victim leaves evidence on the perpetrator. The victim also leaves evidence on the surroundings and the surroundings on the victim, and then again the perpetrator as well. So it's up to me to be able to pick that up and to interpret that, because it's one thing to see something, and I think that's the important thing of forensic pathology, is you need to be able to interpret what you are seeing. What does it mean when the brain is swollen? What does it tell me about the story? Again, you know, seeing the video, and for the last time I can try and assist the process to not only answer the family's questions how their loved one died, but also to allow this victim to give us the evidence that might actually put the perpetrator behind bars.
That is quite deep. In your chapter, and the baby fell out of the pram, it would be, you say, it would be a sad day if we were to lose our humanity. What do you mean by that?
Absolutely. You know, people often ask, well, do you cry? And obviously not there. I can't stand next to the side of the body and now I'm in tears and I'm sad about what has happened to this person, as much as it is sad and tragic what has happened to any victim. But if I stand there and I now cry and I don't concentrate on what I'm doing, I'm not serving the process. I need to be able to take that step back and look at this person's body. The worst has already happened. That person is not there anymore. They are dead. Now it's just the body that's giving us all these answers, and I need to approach the post-mortem in that manner. But it would be very sad if I just looked at every single case as another case. That is not a case. That's a person. That used to be somebody's child, somebody's mother, somebody's father. And I think that's the one thing that I always have at the back of my mind. Even though I might be doing the post-mortem on the robber, that was still somebody's loved one. It's not my place to judge what this person has done in their life and how they ended up there.
I just talked about to somebody yesterday about that sword murder in Krugersdorp.
Yes.
And the perpetrator that went to jail, he had a mother and a father, and it was very hard on them as well.
Absolutely.
When you have a kid, you don't think that kid is going to do something horrific to somebody else. So they're also victims in the situation.
They've also lost their child.
Yeah.
I mean, he's out on parole now.
Yeah.
But they also went through a huge amount of trauma, I'm sure. And I think people tend to throw stones very easily, as though we are all blameless. I think it's easier to think of anything in life as them and us, and that can't happen to you. And I think one should never do that. We're all just human. But I feel very sorry for their parents, for his parents as well.
Yeah, I do too. It was quite poignant for me when you talked about doing the autopsy on Lucky Dube, and then you were stuck in a traffic held up, and it was actually his funeral. So
No, that was actually of a different deceased. It was Mr. Stanley Nkosi's
Okay,
funeral
sorry,
procession that I was stuck in, yes.
okay, sorry, I'm confused between. Sorry,
No, don't worry.
So, but you did the autopsy on the Nkosi and then his funeral. Sorry about
Yes,
that.
yeah, I drove past his house, and it was only by chance that I realized it, because in that instance the SAP 180 was completed properly. And it's funny how I picked up the address, because that's not something you focus on. Usually you will see the area, for example, or you will, but I picked up the home address, and, then the penny dropped, and I realized that's why I was sitting in such horrific traffic.
It must.
It hits home.
It
Does
home, yeah.
hit home, yeah.
If we look at the justice system again, the toxology reports, who does it get done by now? And it takes so long. So justice, it's basically justice denied.
Justice denied.
Yes.
Absolutely. It's unfortunately out of our hands. So toxicology goes to forensic chemi labs, which is now resorting under the National Health Laboratory Services. And funny you mentioned that. I was thinking about 2 weeks ago, I remember an autopsy that I did on somebody many, many years ago. In fact, I found out 12 years ago. And I was thinking about it, and in that case I had gone to the scene of death. And I was wondering, why I haven't seen the toxicology back. And in the week somebody brought me the docket, the case file, and they thought it had come back. I said, well, no, it's still not back, and it's 12 years. So there's a tremendous delay, and I think families don't always realize that it's not us sitting on the reports and that we just, not, twiddling our thumbs, not doing our jobs.
Yeah.
It's not that, but those cases, the samples go to forensic chemi labs, and once it's left our hands, it's out of our hands. We don't have any control over that. And I mean, it's an incredible, it's a travesty that we have to wait that long, and that families have to wait that long. For me, it's a frustration because I can't finalize these reports, and they are sitting on my computer. But I mean, that's an administrative frustration for the families. It's their loved one, they can't get answers. The police are also stuck in that because they can't. How do you investigate something that might be a crime or might not be a crime if you don't have the answers?
The DNA labs is exactly the same. There was a massive backlog. Is it still so?
I'm not sure. You know what? We don't always, in terms of the DNA, it doesn't necessarily come back to us because that falls under the bigger part of the investigation. So that goes to the SAPS. Doesn't come back. The results don't come back to us.
So on a deeper level, do you think you've seen true evil?
Yes, I have certainly seen true evil. There's two cases that come to mind whenever somebody asks me that. The one is Tandil Wetu, which is...
I was going to ask about it because that's the one that stood out for me as well.
Yeah, it's a horrific story. And it touched me right from the get-go. I remember how the little girl's mom acted when I walked out of court and I saw her and her employer there, how devastated they both were. And that perpetrator, I think, is the face of true evil. The fact how he immediately wanted to find out who spilled the beans, who is that person, and there was just a sense of evil surrounding it. But the other case is the case that I simply touched on in the book, and this is the Rhodes Park murders, where two couples, and I always think they were coming from church. I don't know why. I think it's because they were dressed so incredibly neatly. And it was on a Sunday, and these two couples walked into this park having a nice stroll, and they were overcome by a bunch of truly evil people, and they tied the men up, threw them in the dam, and they raped and sexually assaulted the ladies. So the ladies could hear the men drowning, and the men could hear the ladies being raped and assaulted. And there was just something to that really gripped me, and I knew this is evil. And you would think I would say that more, but there's just certain, cases that's just terrible. The victims were really faced with true evil. And I think everybody that worked on those deaths, and also on the ladies who survived, fortunately, were just incredibly touched by what has happened to them. Bruce van der Skyff was the investigating officer, and he went above and beyond. What he did for those ladies is absolutely amazing. But I don't think anybody that worked with them or with the deceased husbands were left untouched.
I just recently, I don't often go, but I went and supported Olivia for the Jazreel Foundation to the last case in the Magistrates Court, which was in Alex for Gerard Ackerman.
Oh yeah.
And I looked at him, and that was my feeling as well. There's just absolutely no remorse. He's just sitting there, and he didn't feel. There's excuses, like I think his name was Pilani, the security guard for Tandalwetu.
Yeah.
He felt nothing.
He didn't.
He just wanted to.
He wanted what he wanted.
Exactly.
And he doesn't care who he hurts and who he kills in the process.
She was 2.5 years old.
She was a little girl. Yeah, it was.
And yeah, no, I don't. That is for me is true evil. That's the one thing that really got to me.
Absolutely. You know, when I close my eyes, I can still see her little body. I can still see the way she was dressed. It is, after all these years.
It's very, very sad. We touched on the other things. What message would you have for other women during the 16 days of action or activism, that, like the UN calls it?
You know what? That we are actually stronger than we believe we are, but it lies in yourself. You've got to take that first step. For me, from a religious point of view, I always know God's got my back. But He's not going to push me. I need to make that step. And I think for all of us, you've got it in you. You might not believe it, but you are actually stronger than you think. And I think women have a lot to offer. We have so much to offer. There's a tenderness, but also a fierceness at the same time. And I think if we could just get to the point where we realize that and realize our abilities and what we have to offer, I think that will also make a major difference.
Absolutely. I'm going to end up with your words. We need to love hard, appreciate the people in our lives, and make every single day count. That's strong words, and it is important because you never know what tomorrow might bring.
Absolutely. I think that's what I live by.
Yeah, it's a very good motto to live by. Thank you very much for your time. If it's online, it's also in Afrikaans, am I correct? What's
That's
it
correct.
in Afrikaans called?
Autopsies, stories van die autopsietafel. Now I can't remember my own
And
name.
you also have, it's in Afrikaans only at this stage. You don't think they're going to ever do it in English, the autopsy program? It's a KykNet program.
It's on VIA, and I think we aired the last episode last week, but it is on Showmax in English, where it has subtitles as well.
Okay, subtitles. Great, thank you very much, and thank you for speaking to me.
Thank you very much for having me.
Okay, great. I've made a choice, I stand proud. I'm a girl on fire. Countless hours on the range, I am responsibly armed. I am your equal. I've empowered myself, I have practiced and trained. Fear won't control me. With my sisters in arms, we will make ourselves heard. We'll stand together. I'm a girl on fire. I'm not a victim. A girl on fire. I'll stand my ground. Girl on fire. I've made a choice. I stand proud. I'm a girl on fire.
stand our ground. Girls on fire, we've made a choice. We stand proud. We're girls